Hey everyone, my name is Michael Green and I collect insulators. I'm going to tell you all about insulator collecting today. But first, look at my collection here. I have insulators from all over the world, all different kinds. They were used on telegraph lines, telephone lines, and electric lines. They made millions of insulators and were used all over the world. There's thousands of different kinds. When I was a kid, I used to walk the railroad tracks that went behind my house, and I always liked colored glass, and I used to find broken insulators in different colors, like some of the ones I have in the window here. I used to find green ones and purple ones, and different places I went to, they had blue ones and amber ones. So I really got interested when I was a kid with all the different colors and shapes. And I'm going to tell you more about insulators and how they evolved. The main type of insulators people collect are called pin type insulators, and they were used on top of telegraph, telephone, and electric poles, and they kept the electric current from running from the wire down the pole to the ground. And they use insulators for all those different applications. But the first were the telegraph lines, and they were first put up in the 1840s. And at the time, they just used crude glass insulators, and they didn't have any threads inside like this one here. They were called threadless insulators. Here's a picture of one that was used along the Transcontinental Railroad from the 1860s. It's another threadless style. And the threadless types were used on the poles. They just put them on the pins with tar and burlap, and a lot of times they would pop off the pins. So in 1865, a man named Lewis Cobbett came up with the idea of putting threads inside the insulators. This particular one here is from the late 1860s or early 1870s. It was found in an attic of a building in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is an early threaded pin here. So that revolutionized insulators so they wouldn't come off the pins. And they started putting threads in all the insulators and threading the pins. And then, so there was telegraph lines that ran all over the United States and in the world also. They had telegraph lines, but by the 1870s, the telephone was invented. And by the late 1870s and 1880s, they started building telephone lines all over the country. And eventually there was, millions of telephone insulators made. I have some in my window here, like this purple one here and this yellow one here from Canada. Here's another purple one. Those are all from the early 1900s. Here's the opalescent one here that was used on telephone lines. That was made in the 1920s or 30s. Here's a purple one here that was made in the early 1900s and used in Colorado and states around Colorado. And then here's another one that was made in Canada for toll telephone lines. In the 1920s, this style was made for telephone lines and was really popular. You can find them in all different colors, and that style was even used all over the world, in South America and Spain and different places, so they're fun to collect. And then later on, in the 1890s and early 1900s, electricity became popular, and they started putting up power lines and all different towns and at old mills, old mines, and they needed insulators for higher voltage, so they made bigger insulators, and this is one of the first ones here. It's a botch patent made by Thomas and Sons in the late 1890s and around the turn of the century. It's 3 porcelain pieces that was glaze welded together. It's like 3 bowls that were set into each other, and the glaze held the insulators pieces together. So it was a much better insulator than just the smaller insulators at the time. Here's one here that me and a friend of mine found in South Carolina on one of the first transmission lines to a mill that was built in 1895. And eventually the voltages got higher and higher, so they needed bigger insulators. Like here's some right here. They used Portland cement to put these shells together, so they were much better insulators, but the Portland cement expanded and contracted, so a lot of the early ones would crack the porcelain, and eventually, after experimenting a lot, they came up with better insulators for higher voltage lines. There's lots of places you can find insulators. You can find insulators along old railroad lines. The best thing to do, even if you have an old railroad line close to where you live and there's no poles, you can find old pictures like this one here. And I've been to this location. The poles are gone now, but if you look for old pictures, you can find that sometimes there was even lines on both sides of the track. One time when I was a teenager, there was a railroad line I used to hunt along, and I had no idea that there was a old telephone line on the other side of the track till I saw a picture in an old newspaper article. And I went back and looked along the other side of the railroad track, and I found insulators on the other side, and I had no idea they were there. Other places to look for insulators are, also, if you look along railroad lines, even if the poles are gone, you can look around where the poles were cut down, and even sometimes the poles were pulled up out of the ground and they threw the insulators down on the ground. When I was a kid in Colorado, I used to dig up the insulators where the poles used to be, and the poles were gone, but I'd find like 10 or 20 insulators buried in each hole where the poles were pulled up out of the ground. Also, you can look on old buildings and the attics, old railroad depots in the attics. Some of the very first telegraph lines ran into the attics of old railroad depots, and people have found some really valuable insulators in the attics of railroad depots. You can go to insulator shows to get insulators. Look on old farms. A lot of times the farmers got the poles when they cut them down, and sometimes you can find piles of insulators where they took the poles and used it for fence posts, but they just threw the insulators in a pile. You can also get with linemen and utility companies. Sometimes you can find insulators there. Look along old roads. A lot of old telephone lines ran along old roads, and if you do your research and find old photographs of where the poles used to be, you can walk along the old roads. One time, me and a friend were insulator hunting along an old power line, and we took a break, and my friend set his backpack down on the side of the road, and we looked down and found the insulator just laying on the side of the road where our old telephone line once ran, and we weren't even looking for insulators in that particular spot, so that was pretty funny. Also, you can find insulators at flea markets, antique stores, on the internet. There's all different kind of websites that you can find insulators on the internet. You can look along power lines, even if the power lines look new. Some of them were used on the same right-of-way as the original power lines built over 120 years ago. Me and my friend have hunted different power lines and found some of the earliest porcelain insulators they ever used, and you wouldn't even know that they were used there unless you do research. And also you can find insulators in old mines, around old substations and the transformer buildings, old dumps. You can get with older people, and ask them where the old dumps used to be, or ask guys that dig for old bottles and see if they find insulators. And you can even find insulators in old ghost towns and abandoned buildings and places. Now I'm going to tell you about how you find out more about insulator collecting. There's a lot of different places to look on the internet. One of my favorites that's been around since the 1990s is insulators.info. It's ran by Bill Meyer, and it has all kinds of information about insulator collecting. It has where the local insulator show listings are all over the country. It'll tell you what day it is, what time, and you can also go to nia.org. That's the National Insulator Association website, and there's all kinds of information there about insulators, and also about insulators that have been altered. Like sometimes people use irradiation to change the color of insulators, and insulator collectors don't like that because they like insulators to be original the way they were made and not altered. And there's a lot of information there. Also, Elton Gish has a great porcelain insulator website. It's r-infinity.com. He also put out some great books about porcelain insulators, and you can order these from him on his website. Here's a value guide, and you can use the guide here with all the different styles. It'll tell you what U numbers are assigned to the insulator and all the dimensions, and then you can look them up in the value guide and see how much they're worth. There's also a glass insulator value guide put out by Don Braille, and it tells you what all the glass insulators are worth. It has the style by the CD number, and you can look them up and see how much they are worth. And he just put out a brand new price guide. This is the older one, but in the past month or two he just put out a new one. Also, you can go to, let's see, you can also get the Crown Jewels of the Wire magazine, all insulators, Crown Jewels of the Wire. It comes out quarterly, every year, so 4 times. This is the summer edition I just got, and it's put out by Raven and Michelle Kislarski, and you can also go to their website. It's allinsulators.com. Another friend of mine, Ray Klingsmith, has a website. It's glassdiscoveries.com, and he usually has an auction every month or two and sells the best insulators you can find in his auctions. He's been collecting since the late 1960s, early 1970s, and knows as much as anyone about insulator collecting, and he always has some great insulators for sale, so go check him out at glassdiscoveries.com. Also on Facebook, there's a lot of different groups to learn about insulators and to talk to people about them and chat with people. Let's see, there's lots of different ways to display your insulators. Like, I like my glass ones here in the window. My friend Dudley Ellis gave me these glass shelves when I moved to our house here, and they look great with the glass insulators in the window. I also have these wooden shelves that my wife helped me build, and my sister and brother-in-law helped me get when I moved in the house. We built them, and the porcelain insulators look great on the wooden shelves. I also have lots of insulators outside everywhere, but some people get light cabinets also for the glass insulators. They're just backlit with fluorescent lights. So that's another great way to display your insulators. Insulator collectors don't like it when people stain, alter, or crackle insulators. Sometimes these are real colors, but some people take clear insulators and stain them with a glass stain to make them colorful, but they're just trying to make money off of insulator collectors, and we don't like it. Sometimes people will crackle them or drill holes in them also, and if you're thinking about drilling holes in insulators to make lamps or a craft project, make sure that they're nothing special or valuable. I've seen a lot of nice insulators destroyed by people drilling holes in them, and it's really sad. Also, let's see here. I'm going to show you how to clean insulators. Alright guys, there's many different ways you can clean insulators, but my favorite is to use Brillo pads and Barkeeper's Friend. If you have really dirty insulators covered with soot or rust, you can take the Barkeeper's Friend and get a bucket or a pan and fill it up with water, pour a good bit of this and mix it in with the water and let the insulator soak for a few days, and then take it out and just get room temperature water. You don't want it too hot or too cold. You could crack the insulator. And also, you never want to wash insulators in the dishwasher. People have done it and it cracks the insulators. It's really stupid, but people do it. So anyways, you just get your water room temperature, get a Brillo pad. I like Brillo pads. I don't like SOS pads or other scrubbing pads or steel wool. I've cleaned insulators with SOS pads before and it scratched the surface, so I like Brillo pads. They work the best. So you get the temperature of the water, room temperature, you get the insulator wet, you pour on some of this Barkeeper's Friend, you take the Brillo pad, get it wet and soapy, and you just clean the insulator surface. Barkeeper's Friend is supposed to have glass polish in it too, so it really shines up the glass or porcelain. You just scrub everywhere. You can get an old toothbrush to clean the inside of the threads, but you just scrub the surface and rinse it off. Sometimes the insulators are really dirty with the train soot or dirt and rust from iron wires over the years, but it works great. And then you just dry it off and it'll look great in your display. All right. Now that I've showed you how to clean insulators, I'm just going to show you some of my collection here. I like the colorful and unusual styles. They had all different types of applications, like the blue one there on the left was made for strains and guy wires, and the brown one here was made for a catenary line along an electric railway line in New York. And here's some telephone styles, transposition there, the brown one. More power styles here, and telephone. The blue one there is a cutout, it had a blade that you pulled out. And more telephone and power styles. Another strain insulator. This one here is called a helmet. They were popular along street railway lines and trolley lines and power lines in the early 1900s. The red one there is from the United Kingdom. It was made and used during World War II, and it marked power lines on telegraph lines along the railway there. This unusual style here is used for street lights in the 19-teens, and they were only found in Connecticut. That's neat. Some more unusual styles made for electric lines and telephone lines. Telegraph. Lots of different colors and shapes. I like the porcelain ones because they have a lot of character. Here's a Mickey Mouse style used on power lines in Washington State. The yellow one there was used on power lines in Colorado. Lots of other styles here. It's another helmet style. The green one there is from Russia, or maybe the Ukraine or Poland. The green one there was used on streetlight circuits. There's a pretty cranberry red rack spool. There was thousands of different styles made all over the world. And these here mainly were used all over the US. There's a few foreign ones, but they were used in small towns and along railroad lines and power lines and telephone lines all over the country. There's a lot of history attached to them. That's why I like them. It's fun to go look for them and find new styles and colors. There's a few more I have in my collection. All different varieties. Your smaller ones that were used on telephone lines. And here's other styles. all different kinds used for radio antennas and lightning arresters. Radios were popular in the 1920s and 30s, and they made all different kinds of insulators for radios and strain insulators. I got lots of knife switches and light sockets, light switches, like this early one here from the early 1900s made by C.S. Knowles in a beautiful teal green. It's the only one I've ever seen like it. It just hung from a wire from the ceiling. You could turn the light on and off with it. Here's some other light pendants and light sockets made by Cutler Hammer in the early 1900s, 19-teens. And I guess that's about it for now, guys. Thank you for watching my videos. I'll make more in the future. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And I really appreciate it if you guys would like and subscribe to my videos. Thank you.